They called the structure a tide lock because it held the ocean like a polite fist, throttling storms into schedules so the aquacities could stack glass on the water and pretend the world had learned manners. But under the lock, inside a pressure vault older than the charter itself, something scaled and patient waited with its wings tied to economics. Aaron Voss maintained the lock for a salary that tasted like brine and aspirin, a human who never lost to corrosion because corrosion never met his stubborn. And on the morning, when the polar jet forgot diplomacy and bent toward the city with the intent of an argument, Aaron found a hairline crack in the vault that wasn't in any blueprint, like a vein where the planet kept a secret. The secret had a name burned into the rivets by a hand that knew shame. Pattern Drake. Specimen K2, a dragon classed as infrastructure after the last climate war, taught everyone to say renewable with their hand on a leash. The brief said its wings could convert fluid chaos into laminar obedience. And the leash had a counter that charged coin every time the city asked whether to be a better person. Do not open, the maintenance liturgy warned. But Aaron had never learned to worship instructions that forgot people, and the storm tracker on his wrist drew a line straight through the fish farms and into the primary school, where the windows made promises they couldn't keep. So he keyed the vault for manual access and practiced the sentence that would ruin his career and save his morning. I take responsibility. The vault refused drama. Its lights were the color of administrative apologies. But the dragon inside did not belong to the color palette. Their scales held the kind of black that drinks neon and returns it as math. And their wings, bound tight with superconductive bands, shivered in patterns that knew currents, the way old sailors know debts. You're early, the dragon said, voice arriving as pressure rather than sound, a tide that had learned language. Their eyes were slate discs with the kindness of harbors and the caution of knives. And when they blinked, the air remembered thunder. I'm desperate, Aring replied, because truth accelerates tools, and showed the storm's path on his wristcast, a thin blue heresy. The dragon watched with the sadness of professionals who can solve a problem while handcuffed to the reason it exists. They will bill you for this, the dragon said, flicking a bound wing toward the leash meter that had replaced saints in modern chapels. They will call my breath a surcharge. And then softer, and children still drown in invoices. Aaron touched the primary band lock, a device built by someone frightened of beauty, and felt the hum of gates that understood money better than mercy. The override required 2 keys and 1 superstition. Someone had to believe the ocean would forgive. They had only 1 key and a superstition each. So Aaron did a dangerous thing. He asked a prisoner for help. Name me, the dragon said, because chains obey nouns. And when Aaron whispered, Kadal, a taste like rain on iron went through the vault, and the bands loosened at pity's width, just enough for the dragon to tilt a wing and graze the lock with a scale that carried algorithms older than policing. The band's counter paused, as if embarrassed to be seen working. Up above, the western wall took its first slap. The aquacity lurched in a way architects call elastic behavior, and fishermen call oh no. And the farm floats began to talk to each other with the frantic intimacy of strangers in a lifeboat. Aaron broke the second seal, and the vault heard a sound like a map rolling itself open for the first time. Cadle's wings did not reveal stars. They revealed rivers, the metabolisms of an ocean written in silver veins across membranes that remembered continents. Every eddy a syllable, every gyre a promise. When the wings spread to half their span, the vault's pressure equalized out of respect. When they reached full, the storm above hesitated because physics had been invited to a better metaphor. Guide me, Cadle asked, not because they needed a human, but because partnership changes what rescue tastes like. Aaron swallowed fear and drew a path with his hands, elbows remembering the choreography of a childhood in boats before cities invented floors. Cadle hummed in the register, where buildings admit they are only intentions. And the tide lock answered, ears choosing mercy over policy. The storm hit, but it did not take. It leaned and slid and went elsewhere with the mood of a criminal shown a family photo. Whales surfaced in places the forecast hadn't rented. The primary school kept its windows. The fish farms lost 1 net and 2 arguments. The city kept its lights and learned how to think without invoices. When it ended, The leash meter printed a receipt full of insults: unauthorized conversion, breach of covenant, ecological poaching, and Kedal laughed with the patience of old water and tucked their wings like a promise being folded for later. Aaron waited for sirens that never come quietly and practiced unemployment in his head, choosing which lies deserved to be told tenderly. The sirens brought uniforms, who smelled like weather they hadn't earned. And behind them came Marindil, city controller and accountant of destiny, a woman who loved the sea the way a landlord loves windows. She looked at Aaron, and at the meter, then at Cadel, and her mouth found a shape that had never had to hold gratitude. "You broke 3 contracts and a myth," she said, voice even, as if fairness lived in tone. "You released infrastructure, and then to Cadel, you are expensive." "I am alive," Cadel said, and their wings clicked as scales settled. "The receipt will not keep a child dry," and Marin flinched, because arithmetic has not yet learned to win arguments against nouns like child, rain, breath. She tried anyway. "We were told your kind were volatile," she said. "We were told the city is a hand, and hands must close to hold things." And Cadel tilted a wing until light made a map on the ceiling, showing how hands can also lift and open. And if anyone wrote that down, they did it in a heartbeat. "Bill me," Aaron said, because someone needed to give the room a target. "Dock me forever," and then he did the thing that ends careers and begins civilizations. Or write a new contract that pays in safety first. Marin's eyes did a math they hadn't done since childhood, when she learned the difference between waves and punishments. Beyond the vault, the city's feed filled with videos of calm schools and saved nets. The mayor wrote "thank you" with a typo that made it sweeter. A grandmother posted a pot of soup and 15 names of children who did not need new shoes. Accounting blinked into relevance. The tribunal convened in a chamber shaped like a coin and tried to convince itself it was a circle. Engineers argued duty, economists accused compassion of fraud, ethicists tried on voices until one fit. Cadel stood quietly, because dragons know that rooms teach themselves if left alone with their mirrors long enough. Aaron spoke once. "We taught a lock to sing." Testimony arrived from uninvited places: an octopus farmer explaining how laminar flows keep eggs from despair, a ferry pilot who had always wanted to fly a smaller sky, a child who had drawn the storm as a dog that learned to sit. The tribunal wrote notes in the way that institutions apologize when they lack mouths. It ended the only way human meetings end, with a compromise that made everyone angry and a door that needed oil. The city would recognize Cadal as a sovereign contractor. The leash would remain, but lose its teeth. Invoices would convert to gratitude credits, redeemable as infrastructure in neighborhoods that knew the taste of rain better than budgets. Aaron would keep his job and gain a title that sounded like punishment and felt like honesty, keeper of currents. That night, Cadal asked to see the sky without the lock in the way. Aaron took them to the surface, to the edge where the aquacity pretends to be coastline. The wind was a polite stranger now. Stars tried to compete with factory lights and lost. Cadal lifted a wing, and for a moment, the night wore rivers. Constellations of water moving as if someone had reminded gravity about choreography. "What are you, really?" Aaron asked, not as interrogator, but as friend. Cadal thought the way only old things think, slowly, with attention as a sacrament. "We are the memory of weather," they said. "Long ago, before anyone built storms, my kind traveled between planets that needed to learn breath. You chained us to buy neatness. You can unlearn that. Will others come?" Aaron asked, because hope is the most practical tool. Cadal laughed, and distant horizons blinked as if islands were practicing. "They are already in your myths," they said. "You call them sea serpents, sky whales, thunderbirds. We call them cousins. When they hear one of us was paid in soup, they will visit." Marin arrived with a compromise in a thermos and an apology written on a napkin. "I grew up on old docks," she said, "and forgot. Remind me weekly." And Cadal nodded like a tide, choosing not to embarrass a harbor. Aaron poured soup and learned the sacred craft of serving something hot to a creature that could drink hurricanes. In the weeks that followed, the city discovered the economics of mercy. Flood maps learned to include grandmothers. Fishermen began reading the river constellations off Cadal's wings like hymnals. School children pasted close stickers on storm doors, not as refusal, but as choreography. The lock sang softer, and the markets, baffled, turned their boredom into innovation, and sold boats that could apologize to waves. And because stories hire their own sequels, a signal arrived from a ridge city 3 seas away. Their tide lock had cracked, and beneath it a dragon slept angry, wings sutured to policy. They asked for a keeper of currents, who knew how to pick a lock with a name. Aaron packed a wrench, Cadel stretched a river, and the ocean lay down to watch, interested in its own future. 3 seas away, the ridge city coral crest clung to platforms bolted into basalt teeth where wind arrived in a hurry, and water climbed stairs for a better view. And that's where Aaron Vess brought Cadel, when the request came smelling of rust and well-mannered panic. The message was as brief as sentences that tell the truth for lack of time. The crest tide lock had cracked, and the dragon beneath it slept badly, its wings sutured to policy by clips, unaware of their own weight. Cadel dove under knife edges of swell, like a comma that saves a paragraph, and surfaced beside. Aaron in breaths that taught wind to listen, while the city's silhouette sketched fangs against the sky. At the main quay, they were met by Lysa Audrin, Stone Warden by decree, and Fisher by ancestral stubbornness, hands of salt, and a clipboard of sins forgiven by outcomes. "You're the keeper of currents who taught a lock to sing," she said, without asking, because some introductions waste minutes. "The fault line runs under the east buttress," Lysa added, walking without theatrics. "We've stapled it with money and prayers. Neither held." The buttress groaned like a saint with opinions. Cadel's pupils narrowed to ship's channels. They descended through a maintenance throat that remembered earthquakes. The vault door wore the recent vocabulary of fear, caution decals, audit seals, and a plea and marker that read "Be kind to bolts." Inside, the dragon designation R3, colloquial ridge worm, lay in a harness designed by lawsuits. Its membranes puckered where a generation of well-meaning engineers had stitched obedience into geometry. Aaron stopped, because caution is a tool. Cadel did not speak. They listened the way old rivers listen, counting rocks by the pressure they owe. "This one's angry," Cadel said finally, not as judgment, but as weather. R3 opened one eye with the reluctance of a professional asked to work on their day off. "Close the door," they said, voice like surf under planks. "Or open me. But do not narrate pity." "Both," Lysa said, "because stone wardens are paid in impossible." Aaron moved to the band board and found a familiar cruelty-redundant locks with theology instead of labels. He traced conduits with fingers that had learned to apologize to doors and felt the place where a human had told a lie to himself and called it safety. "Cadel," he said, "I'll need your name trick and a better superstition." "We won't name them," Cadel murmured. "They already have one. Ask permission properly." Aaron swallowed pride, the wrong solvent, and turned to R3. "Will you let us unbind you long enough to keep the ridge?" The first band released with a sound like a count settling. Cadel elevated a wing and wrote instructions in faint spray. "When the east gust arrives, fold 12 degrees. When the backwash lies, refuse to believe. When fear narrates, interrupt with counting." They unfurled R3 a third, then half, then into a shape the vault recognized as its better self. R3's wings did not show stars or rivers. They showed cliffs, the grammar of wind against stone, eddies hanging like question marks, vortices braided like rope. As the harness slackened, the ridge city above rattled, and then, as if remembering, sat. "Fold," Cadel told R3. R3 folded. The gust met a shape that didn't excuse it and learned manners. The east buttress stopped auditioning to be history and accepted its job as present tense. The meter tried to print a receipt that called all this unauthorized and failed because someone had spilled soup in it last season. Lysa laughed until her weathered face learned a new line. "We'll pay in stew," she said. "Send a bill to my kitchen. Anger doesn't vanish when harnesses do. It needs minutes to practice being memory." R3's membranes shivered with old stitches that no longer own them. "You asked for chores," Aaron said softly. "We have a long list." They ran a day of work that refused to become cinema. R3 held a fold while Cadel tuned backwash. Lysa redirected foot traffic across the cliff spans so crowds wouldn't climb the wind. Children counted wrong on purpose and were praised. A baker propped a door open and apologized to it. The ridge learned the taste of humility. When the evening updraft tried to grandstand, R3 preempted with a small, ugly maneuver that saved 3 scaffolders and broke no hearts. The city cheered late best compliment. The audit seals peeled off the vault door by themselves, as if glue respects competence. At dusk, the tribunal assembled in a cantilevered hall that politicians had commissioned to feel brave near edges. Marin Deal attended by feed, face less armored than yesterday. We will recognize Ridgeworm R3 as sovereign contractor under the Common Decency Statute, she said. Leashes convert to calendars. Debits convert to soup. A calendar is a kinder chain, R3 said, amused. We'll take it. On one more condition. The hall held its breath with the greed of rooms that collect conditions and forget to spend them. You will return the cliffs to themselves, R3 continued. Stop frosting them with glass. Let wind talk to stone without lawyers. Lysa grinned, an expression that looked like a cliff choosing balance. We'll move 3 terraces back and plant anchors where vanity tried to grow. A vote passed because gravity had an ally. Night on the ridge wears voices. The sea tells the sky what the day did wrong. The sky corrects gently. Erin sat with Kydal and R3 on a catwalk that pretended not to be a poem. Why do you help us? He asked R3, aware that gratitude sometimes sounds like a tax. R3 considered the drop. Because someone asked permission, they said. Because you're stubborn brought soup. Because my cousins are tired of being verbs, you only conjugate as disaster. Cousins? Erin asked, remembering Kydal's Horizon joke. R3 flicked a wing toward the southeast. There's a sky whale in the upcountry dam, a thunderbird in a mountain turbine, a cloud eel pinned under a floodgate. You've chained memory in all the places you mispronounced control. Send minutes in stew. A gull dropped a shell that cracked open into a metaphor. Lysa toasted the metaphor with tea out of a thermos that had survived 3 elections. We'll build a route, she said. Keeper of currents, you're drafted. Above them, the Aurora tried a thin rehearsal and failed adorably. Kydal lifted a wing, and the color learned to lean. R3 traced a small cliff in the air so the wind could practice with a toy before meeting the real thing. The Ridge City, which had been pretending competence, started to own it. Later, in the hush that follows days that chose work over legend, Erin asked the question he feared most. What happens when we leave? You schedule remembering, Kydal said, echoing a promise older than both of them. R3 added, and you teach a bored teenager to hold a fold while thinking about someone they love. That's better than any shackle. They slept a little. The cliff slept less. Morning arrived with the arrogant grace of a good tool. News from far harbors pinged the feed. A dam that sighed when its thunderbird was unbolted. A turbine that spun nicer after its whale of sky was allowed to hum. A floodgate that apologized to a cloud eel and was forgiven. The world, apparently, had been waiting for permission to be clever. On departure day, the city gathered to clap late and badly. Lysa handed Erin a ledger labeled almosts and a spoon that doubled as a gavel. For meetings that don't deserve tables, she said. R3 opened a wing and let children trace little eddies with their fingers. Kydal bowed in the grammar of rivers. Where to next? Erin asked, as the boat shrugged free. Kydal looked inland with a smile that knew too many verbs. Up the watershed, they said, where people taught mountains to hold their breath. We'll give the air back its sentences. Upriver, the dam at Greyhearth wore the mountain like a crown it hadn't earned, arches of concrete frowning across a gorge, carved by older opinions. The reservoir behind it was a sky put in a drawer, and the wind above it behaved like a clerk learning to speak. They had chained a sky whale under Turbine 3 and called it peak efficiency. Erin Voss, Kydal, and Lysa Audrin arrived with a convoy of boredom technicians, cooks, a choir of aunties with towels, a kid who could count wrong in 3 dialects. The dam authority met them with legal smiles and a marketing deck titled Harmony Through Torque. We're proud partners in the energy of tomorrow, said Director Haffaldane, who had never been wet without consent. Tomorrow is impatient, Kydal said mildly. Where's your whale? Haffel bristled at the indecency of nouns. Asset SW1 is integrated into Turbine 3, he replied. Its resonant oscillations increase throughput by 12%. We compensate fairly. Compensate with what? Lysa asked. Silence, said a voice from the penstock, and the room forgot how to breathe. They descended into a humidity that smelled like old thunder. SW1 floated within a ring of induction coils, huge and gentle, eyes like storms seen from orbit, flukes tethered by bands that translated song into megawatts. Its skin was a galaxy of pale constellations that blinked with a rhythm turbines would never earn. It opened its mouth, and the tunnel learned there are kinds of quiet that unmake fear. "You've been paying me in darkness," the whale said, voice across bones. "I prefer soup. We brought thermoses," Lysa said, "because some diplomacy is food." Erin inspected the coil board. The locks were clever fail-safes, braided with superstition. Algorithms that punished ambiguity, and beneath them lived a simple truth. Someone had mistaken endurance for consent. Cadel touched the water with a wingtip. Ripples wrote instructions that valves enjoyed obeying. "We can release you enough to exhale," Cadel told SW1, "but we need your beat. Promise you won't sell it," SW1 said, and the penstock shivered as if invoices had learned shame. "Common decency statute applies," Lysa answered. "No billing for breath." They loosened the bands by degrees measured in trust. The first exhale arrived like an apology the mountain wanted to hear. Turbine 3 hiccuped, then spun smoother, power curve flattening into competence. Hoffel watched the telemetry with the awe of a man discovering that graphs can blush. Then came the opposition with cameras. A firm called Allworks sold experience channels that monetized wonder. They had licensed the dam's feed, close-ups of the whale's eye, slow-motion fluke shots, branded tears. "This belongs to everyone," said their rep, smiles sharpened on virality. "We help the public feel. The public can bring soup," Lysa said, turning off a spotlight. Allworks tried legal weather. "If you alter the choreography, we'll sue for lost engagement." Hoffel inhaled to say something tragic about stakeholders. Erin spoke first. "We're hosting a failure meeting," he said, and booked the spillway. By dusk, a crowd gathered under the dam workers. Families, bored teenagers, one judge, 3 dogs. The agenda had 2 items, almosts and chores. Erin explained what had nearly gone wrong when the whale couldn't exhale. A mechanic admitted to skipping a gasket. An auntie demonstrated towel protocol for panic. A kid counted wrong and got a cheer. SW1 hummed one long note that turned phones into pocket metronomes. Allworks tried to stream drama. The stream buffered on humility. Comments learned to sit. When the meeting ended, a ledger went up on the bulletin board. "Thank you first. No billing for breath. Soup line here." The judge signed it like law, trying to catch up. "Exhale again?" Erin asked. SW1. The whale obliged. Turbine 3 sang like a tool relieved of flattery. Heffel, chastened and slightly in love with competence, canceled Allworks' contract with a line item called decency. Greyhearth woke to better numbers and quieter guilt. SW1's cadence settled into the grid like a friend who knows where the mugs live. The common decency statute got a local addendum. Breath is infrastructure. Do not invoice. A memo arrived from Capital with teeth dulled by routine. Monetize the movement. Brand the dragons. Package the whales. Charge for permission to feel. Lysa stapled the memo to a beam in the canteen and used it to level a wobbly table. "Best use," she said. Erin found Cadel on the spillway at dawn, watching fog decide whether to be river. "I keep waiting for the other lever to drop," he admitted. "It already did," Cadel said. "You picked it up and called it a spoon." He laughed, surprised at the accuracy. "How many more?" "Enough to keep boredom fashionable," Cadel replied. "Thunderbird, cloud eel, a desert serpent taught to hold sand, still for a luxury dome. People are clever. They make mistakes efficiently." They left Greyhearth with a caravan of minutes and recipes. SW1 heaved a farewell that dampened eyes and scaffolding. Haffel sent an apology fruit basket to his younger self. Allworks pivoted to filming cats. The convoy headed into high country, where turbines pinch thunder to teach it invoices. At the pass, weather attempted narrative. A staged squall, seeded by someone who missed receipts. Drones tried to turn hail into content. Lysa, who loved simple verbs, parked the convoy, handed out towels, and asked a musician to play the wrong song. The squall forgot its line. Drones filmed competence and found it unsellable. They reached the mountain works at noon, a crown of pylons around a plateau, wires thrumming, air tasting of copper and pride. The Thunderbird lived in a cage of silence, an array that caught its charge and called it safety. It glared with the voltage of insult. "Terms?" Erin asked gently. "No heroes," the Thunderbird said. Lightning braided through consonants. Chores, sandwiches. We have both, Lysa said, opening a cooler. The release sequence required choreography. Grounding lines re-earthed to rock that missed rain. Coils detuned from victory. A calendar made where a leash had been. The Thunderbird stepped out of silence, like a musician choosing the right first note. It shook once, taught the plateau to bow, and began to work, charging when clouds overpromised, bleeding into ground when bolts tried to audition for legend. The grid settled into a mood engineers call softer and poets call finally. A local influencer arrived to mourn the loss of spectacular outages. Lysa handed them a ledger of almosts and told them to film that. Their channel went quiet, but their hands got useful. At sunset, Cadel, Eren, and Lysa sat on a cable spool sharing soup with a lightning god who had negotiated sandwiches. "What do we call what we're doing?" Eren asked. "Paroling wonder," Lysa said. "Returning nouns to themselves," Cadel offered. "Keeping the weather employed," the Thunderbird said, amused. The convoy's next message came from inland dunes, where a luxury dome had paid a desert serpent to hold sand still for a golf course that called itself an oasis. "Bring minutes," the note read, "and a spoon." Eren pocketed the canteen ladle like a badge. They rolled at dawn. Behind them, Greyhearth exhaled on schedule. Coral Crest held its edges without acting, and the ocean practiced being a partner. Ahead, sand remembered how to move, and a serpent dreamed of permission. The oasis dome did not deserve its name. It was a golf course with a force field and a story, a bubble where rich air rehearsed superiority, while the dunes outside tried to remember migration. The contract read stabilization services. The desert serpent below read imprisonment with benefits. Eren, Cadel, Lysa, and the convoy of boredom rolled up to a gate that sold exclusivity like weather. Security scanned soup as if it were contraband. Inside, sprinklers wrote cursive on grass. Outside, wind wrote law on sand. "Asset DS9 ensures dune compliance," said the dome director, a man with teeth designed by committee. "We have guests. They expect reliable scenery." "Scenery used to be a verb," Lysa said, unimpressed by nouns pretending to be landscapes. They descended through a maintenance hatch, disguised as glamour. The serpent lay coiled around the dome's foundation, scales matte to swallow glare, eyes bright with the kind of anger that outlives trends. Bands pinned it at the joints, calibrating ripple suppression. Every time wind tried to hum, the bands charged for disobedience. Cadel bowed a gesture rivers use when meeting dunes that are old enough to vote. "We ask to unbind," Cadel said. "We offer chores. We brought a spoon." "A spoon," the serpent said, voice as soft as salt. At last, professionals. Eren approached the control cabinet and found a familiar crime, algorithms that defined safety as stillness. He traced power to a set of escrow accounts, backed by a firm with a name too smooth to be True Orc's infrastructure partners. They had pivoted from monetizing whales to leasing stationary horizons. "Of course," Lysa muttered. They found a new door to invoice. The serpent watched the humans work with the interest of dunes evaluating footprints. "Terms," it said. "No heroes," Eren answered. "Chores, calendars, sandwiches, and a choir," the serpent added. "I want my dunes to sing." Cadel smiled, delighted by audacity. "We can teach wind harmony." They unpinned 2 joints and introduced a schedule certain hours when dunes would migrate in choreographed drift, times when the dome would seal, and guests would be instructed to watch the sky because sand has work. Allworks sent legal weather again. The convoy sent minutes and a grandmother with a ladle. The legal weather blinked and rained soup. The first choir rehearsal was chaos that deserved forgiveness. Wind arrived out of tune. Sand forgot lyrics. The serpent's ripple crashed a fence politely. Inside the dome, golfers complained that the horizon had opinions. Lysa closed the course. The dome director threatened to close the dome. "Do," Cadel said. "It's a bubble. Bubbles like naps." By afternoon, the choir found its throat. The serpent pulsed in long, low notes. Cadel braided countercurrents. Eren tuned relief valves so dune harmonics wouldn't shatter glass. Teenagers who worked in housekeeping stood along the rim and clapped on the off-beat, which turned out to be the right beat. The dunes moved. The sky approved. The dome learned humility. Allworks arrived with drones and a settlement offer that sounded like a threat in a tuxedo. "Brand the choir," said their lawyer. "We'll share ad revenue with the local community fund. The fund will accept sandwiches," Lisa said, "and your drones can film the bulletin board." She pinned up the charter. No billing for breath. Choir schedules public. Dome seals when dunes sing. Guests help stack chairs. The public vote was required by the Regional Commons Act, rarely invoked, rarely trusted. The Dome director begged his subscribers to oppose sand disruption. The subscribers phoned their concierge. The housekeeping teenagers organized a watch party with stew. People who never got invited to domes arrived carrying folding chairs and competence. On stage, a loading dock that had earned a spotlight. Erin presented the almosts. A winter where the serpent had been forced to hold dunes still until the slip face tore free and buried a road. A summer when wind trapped outside the bubble sharpened itself into knives. Cadel demonstrated a countercurrent with a bowl of water and a spoon. And if anyone laughed, it was only because comprehension is a joy obscene in some circles. The serpent spoke last. "You rented my patience," it said to the assembled subscribers and workers in wind. Patience became resentment. Resentment becomes cracks. You can pay me in stillness or in song. One of these invoices will be collectible. The vote passed on the back of stew and teenagers, and a desert tired of pretending. All Works filed an injunction that tripped over the common decency addendum. The judge wrote, "No cinematizing of chores without consent," and scheduled it like weather. At dawn, with the dome sealed and subscribers taught to fetch chairs, the dunes sang for the first time in 100 leased seasons. The serpent conducted with the contentment of a craftsperson whose hands have been returned. Sand moved in sheets like a choir robe. Wind harmonized in fifths, and the golf course apologized by becoming a field of listening. The convoy left the dome as a better roomer. The serpent promised to teach 2 other basins how to hum if they sent spoons. All Works pivoted again. Hand soap. The dome director announced a rebrand, the Listening House. Teenagers laughed him into volunteering. That night, under stars that refused to be sponsored, Arian asked Cadel the question that had been nesting under his ribs. "How does this end?" "With minutes," Cadel said, "and a ledger full of almosts that gets heavier than pride." "Dragons," Aaron said. "Whales, thunderbirds, serpents. Are there more?" Cadel looked toward a ridge where lightning practiced cursive. "Always. And there is one you owe." "Who?" "You," Cadel said gently. "You chained your own breath to invoices. We'll unbind that too." Home tasted like brine, and arguments reheated. Penumbra sound, the aquacity that had learned to clap late glimmered with nets mended by gratitude and rails worn smooth by minutes. Cadel slid beneath pontoons like patience under pressure. The first message waiting for Aaron was a merger notice. The city had strategically aligned with Allworks infrastructure. Partners to stabilize wonder at scale. The mayor's office smelled like clean lament. They promised predictable funding, the deputy said, a phrase that always means someone sold their uncertainty to a calendar. The contract renamed Cadel as Aquatic Resonance Unit and converted gratitude credits back into invoices with warmer fonts. Aaron flipped to the arbitration clause that forbade failure meetings without sponsor approval. "They learned," he said, "so we teach again." A storm line brewed offshore with the ambit public kitchen, Lisa countered, scheduling a citywide failure meeting on the pier under lights that made honesty look good. The agenda, almosts and chores, and the contract. All Works filed an injunction naming soup a disruptive technology. The judge scheduled a hearing and brought a bowl. The injunction melted. The meeting began with a dull glory. A trawler captain admitted to misreading a buoy. A student described panic shrinking when given a towel. An elder told a story about the time the city tried to name a wind and the wind declined. Aaron read the merger aloud, and tape flagged every clause that turned decency into a product. Cadel hummed a note that made pens find the right lines to underline. "Will they sue?" "Yes," Aaron said, "and we will arrive with minutes." Thunder practiced. The pier vibrated with attention. All Works switched tactics. Charm. Their CEO appeared on a screen, hair that had been told it was certainty. "We share your values," she said, a sentence that always means an invoice wants to shake hands. "We simply bring scale. Scale is what fish have," a grandmother said, and the pier decided to laugh. When the first squall shouldered into the harbor mouth, All Works attempted to take over the PA with a branded countdown. The system coughed up soup instead. Cadel unfolded a small river across the surface. Aaron signaled the East Breakwater to open 2 gates early, a trick from the Ledger of Almosts. Teenagers formed a line where panic wanted to sit. The storm arrived and chose not to. The contract lost plausibility. The city kept its breath. A receipt printer in the mayor's office tried to print congratulations and died quietly, as good printers should. Allworks sued for tortious interference with monetized awe. The hearing became a festival of competence. The city presented minutes as evidence. The judge, who had learned to schedule remembering, admitted them as law's favorite dessert. Cadel testified in the language of pressure. "I am not an asset," they said. "I am a partner. Partners don't invoice breath." Allworks argued economies of scale, cited best practices, and produced a consultant with a graph that tried to explain why soup undermines resilience. Lisa offered the consultant a spoon. The graph found itself stirring. The ruling arrived wearing the tone of a hinge deciding to be silent forever. "Civic wonder is a commons," the judge wrote. "No party may enclose it by contract. Acts of care performed in public cannot be commodified. Failure meetings are protected speech." The merger dissolved like a sandcastle in useful rain. The backlash arrived, dressed as nostalgia. A faction argued that leashes at least gave them someone to blame. "What if Cadel leaves?" a counselor asked. Cadel surfaced and rolled like a promise. "I will leave when you don't need me," they said. "Need is not forever. Schedules are." The city voted to codify the Ledger of Almosts as public record and to require every major project to host a failure meeting before funding. Allworks quietly pivoted to selling gratitude analytics and was gently laughed into a grant program that measured nothing but chairs stacked. On the waterline, Aaron sat with Cadel, watching a sea that had decided to keep people as a hobby. "Cadel," he said, "what debt do I still owe?" "Your breath," Cadel replied, kind. "You've been holding it between squalls. Breathe on purpose." He exhaled like a man being introduced to oxygen. It tasted like soup and bolts, and the way a city sounds when it trusts itself. That night the convoy received a message from Far Ice, a calving front where a glacier had hired a dragon of cold to hold still for tourists. The dragon was tired. The tourists were bored. The ice was learning anger. "Bring minutes," the message read, "and hot stew." Aaron packed a ladle, then paused. "One day," he said to Cadel, "we will be done. We will be bored," Cadel corrected. "That is different and better." They left at dawn under gulls that had discovered they preferred competence to crumbs. Behind them, Penumbra Sound counted wrong on purpose and got it right. Ahead, ice remembered friction, and a dragon waited for a city that could schedule mercy. The calving front had the manners of a cathedral and the temper of a stage. A wall of ancient breath waiting for a cue it no longer respected. Tour boats with commentary packages idled at a polite distance, microphones ready to narrate collapse. Under the viewing deck, a dragon of cold lay shackled to an anchor plate and called itself awake. Aaron Voss felt the air take teeth. Cadel swam beneath ice that sounded like old paper. Lisa Audrin haggled with a vendor for hot stew because righteousness burns calories. The tourism board director rehearsed sympathy in the mirror of a brochure. "We highlight nature's power responsibly." The cold dragon's name was Seer. Frost steamed off their scales in little ghosts. Bands around their joints thrummed to a control rhythm that told the glacier when to let go so camera schedules could keep promises. "You choreographed breakage," Cadel said. "Not angry, just accurate." "They could feel responsible," Lisa said. "And bring soup." Seer lifted their head, and the temperature dropped like a quartz gavel. "Do you unbind for spectacle or for mercy?" they asked. "For chores," Aaron said. "For calendars and sandwiches," Cadel added, "because liturgy matters." The bands were of a newer cruelty-smart alloys that tightened when asked questions. Aaron found the debug port and a comment someone had left years ago in the code. "Sorry," he whispered back. Noted. They loosened Seer enough to inhale without cracking history. It changed the sound of the world. Calving thunder thinned into honest creaks. The glacier tried to decide if it was a stage or a body. Seer hummed a frequency that reminded it of being a river that had simply forgotten how to move slowly. The first day ended with no collapses, and the loudest silence tourists had ever paid to hear. Half demanded refunds. Half bought soup. The tourism board escalated. Limited time, final collapse event, early bird pricing, drones that could cry on command. Lysa scheduled a failure meeting on the dock. The agenda: almosts, chores, and refunds. A boat captain admitted to pushing too close once, and had cried in the engine room later. A guide confessed they'd been hired to make metaphors when minutes were needed. A child asked why ice has to fall at all. Because time wants room, Cadel said gently. So does winter, Lysa said, and it doesn't take meetings. The vote to end collapse shows passed by a margin that tasted like stew. The board pivoted to listening expeditions. Drones filmed people being quiet badly and monetized humility for a day before comments taught them to nap. With Seer unbound to breathe and bound to a calendar, the ice began to keep promises that didn't involve applause. Calving happened at dawn on odd days, and at dusk on evens, in volumes that respected seal nurseries and fishing routes. Tourists learned a new verb: arrive to help. They stacked chairs on the dock and were given a ledger of almosts to read on the way home. O-Works appeared one last time, a press release in search of oxygen. We support communities as they transition to sustainable awe. The judge stapled the release to a gull post with a note: receipts optional, gratitude mandatory. Aaron found Seer on the night the Aurora forgot subtlety and painted the inlet like policy, finally learning poetry. Do you ever leave? He asked. We migrate, Seer said. We have cousins on mountain shadows and in freezer vaults you built for nostalgia. We prefer calendars to callers. Cadel surfaced with the grace of tools that know their hands. We have one task left, they said to Aaron. Unbind your breath. Aaron laughed like a door learning oil. How? Choose boredom, Cadel said. Refuse the hero arc when a chore will do. Schedule remembering. Hand the ladle to someone younger. Keep minutes as if they were maps. Morning brought the last hearing the convoy would need for a while. Codifying completion into the commons. The hall was a warehouse with chairs that had history. The resolution was a page long and tasted of bolts. Completion, not victory, is the city's measure. Acts of care in public cannot be commodified. Failure meetings are mandatory for works that touch breath, water, or light. Ledgers of almosts shall be public and boring. Gratitude precedes invoices and may replace them. The vote passed without spectacle, because spectacle was out to lunch. Seer exhaled a fog that felt like permission. Cadel yawned in the register that teaches storms to choose another day. Lysa fixed a hinge because hinges should be the loudest thing in any story, and then only once. The convoy dispersed slowly, like soup cooling to generosity. SW1 sang against a turbine that had learned manners. R3 folded wind into sentences. The serpent conducted dunes at matinee and slept at night. The Thunderbird negotiated with lightning for sandwich rights. Aaron walked the pier with the ledger under his arm and a future he didn't have to fight in his pocket. We're done? He asked Cadel, a little scared of the answer. We're in maintenance, Cadel said. The best part, it never ends and always finishes. You will be happy if you let completion be a habit. He breathed on purpose. The city matched his tempo. Somewhere a printer tried to come back to life and thought better of it. Children taped close stickers to doors that already knew better and then went to bed proud. At the edge of ice, tourists who had come for endings learned to love intervals. They held thermoses and minutes. They watched a calving happen when promised and didn't clap, not because they weren't moved, but because movement had been returned to the world in a way that didn't need applause. Seer stretched with the sound of centuries easing. Completion, they said. See you on another calendar. Bring bread, Lysa answered. We will, Aaron said, and meant it in the small way that repairs mean things. In the big way that cities change when they choose boredom on purpose and find mercy hiding in minutes.